you all have been super successful in the Marines and the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, special operations, all those things. And those are great. Those are great skills that you've got. You know people. And all the problems you're going to see in the business world mostly are people. But it doesn't mean you get to be exactly the same person you were in the military and take all that out there. You're going to have to adapt. And I'll tell you that the best story I heard this week about this has nothing to do with the military. On our podcast, we interviewed the Kansas City Royals baseball announcer for 13 years. And I was thinking, what's this guy going to teach us about business? Well, he started talking about a first base coach, 68 years old. He's like, how complicated can it be to tell the guy on first base to run to second base, to steal second base? How complicated? Well, he said, with 68 years, this guy really knew. He studied the pitchers. He knew what their tells were, when they were going to look over their shoulder and when to tell somebody to run. But more importantly than his wisdom is every year he knew that the 24-year-old professional baseball player in 2021 is not the same as a 24-year-old professional baseball player in 2016. That he had to adapt. Things change. He still has all that wisdom and knowledge, but he's not communicating it the same way that he would before. That's why he was such a great first base coach. And I think that's sort of the lesson for all of us. We have all this great knowledge, but we've got to really listen and pay attention and be curious to figure out, how do we deploy this in an effective way? Because again, people all sort of appreciate your service. Thank you for your service. But at the same time, there's you have no idea what you're talking about with my industry. But you know what? You don't know my industry, my company. This is different. And if we go in there like a bull in a china shop, we're going to find our time is short-lived. So anyway, that's the whole thing. And I wanted to communicate on the video, and I wanted to go through some other things, but let me do a big pause here and just kind of hear what your reaction, your reflections are. If I'm saying things that you can resonate with, maybe based on your own experience, that you've gotten kicked in the teeth a little bit since you've gotten out. For those of you that have gotten out, reaction? Just the interactive part, by the way. And to interact, you have to take the mute off, and then you have to move those things and speak.
Okay, so Jan, I think you hit a lot of key points there, because I know in my journey, it's been kind of back and forth with my mind shift, given that throughout my whole military career, I was, given the mission and executing and making sure that we're doing everything on time and go, 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 no excuses, to now having to kind of step back and, maybe take orders from somebody that's younger than I am, right? And more knowledgeable, even though I know I have the soft skills, right? The leadership, the adaptability, the wanting, being hungry to learn and do my thing. I've been kind of contemplating how I would approach that, right? And of course, being mindful, it's very important. But even now, I see myself being in situations where I'm about to react. And then I had to think to myself, okay, whoa, like take a step back and kind of just be quiet. Yeah. So it's a mind shift, and it takes time, and it takes work.
So I've got a document that I wanted to share with you guys. I've actually used this at the unit at Fort Bragg a bunch of times. What I've seen, especially with some of those folks that have come on these trips, is that they go out there and they're so used to being a senior NCO and training that it's hard for them to get out of that mode. And I've had to pull them aside and say, none of these guys are going to become commandos, but you're going to be a business person. I love the war stories. They love the war stories, but you need to ask them about their world, what's happening, their challenges, their stories. They're not as cool and sexy as your stories, but that's the world you're going into. And to get, I mean, genuinely curious. And that's a tough thing. And one of the things that I say is one of the brutal facts we have to face is, you know, how many of you are basically 30 or under and junior, an officer with a college education? Josh, that's you. You're 31. So, right. So you've got you don't have an easy transition, but you have the easiest transition because everybody wants to hire a junior military officer, especially one that went to an academy. I mean, you're not going to, it's going to be a transition, but you're going to have a lot of people that want to get a hold of you. The, those of you that have been in more than 10 years, that's a tougher transition. How many of you are senior NCOs or senior officers getting out? Yeah. Scott, what were you on the officer or enlisted side?
Officer.
Okay. What branch?
Navy. I'm a
Yeah.
1130 SEAL officer.
Okay. Very good. Are you retired now?
I'm not. I'm at 18 and a half, so I'm on my final tour to get to
Okay.
20.
So you'll be over 40 getting out.
Yeah, I'm 41 right now, but yeah, another year, I'll be about 42 and a half. Yes, sir.
Right. And here's the other brutal fact. The reality is age discrimination is the last form of acceptable discrimination that happens. And I say acceptable. I don't think it's acceptable, but I'm telling you, I used to take my students to Google and places like that on tours in Dublin, Ireland, when we do study abroad. And I mean, the average age in Dublin at Google is 23 years old, and they're trilingual. You know, if you were 35, you were an old person at Google in Dublin. There's a little age discrimination past 40, past 50. Forget it. I mean, absolutely forget it. If you were to get laid off over 50 and you're not at a senior C-suite level. So given the fact that some of you are not Josh, again, we often think of Google, LinkedIn, all those big Fortune 500 sexy companies, but there's a whole hidden job market out there, the small and the mid-size, the jobs that are not advertised, the companies you never heard of. And I'll give you an example. So I work with Google, LinkedIn, Tesla, General Electric, big oil and gas, I mean, big companies, and I work with some small ones. The best company I work with right now is 1,000-person electrical contractor out of Denver, Colorado. They do big commercial electrical contracting projects. If you were in a meeting, if you're a special ops guy, if you were in a meeting at this company, you would feel like you're on a team. You're in a team room. Because there's a dynamic that's real similar to the military. A bunch of craftsmen, blue collar workers, and a bunch of engineers that went to university. And what's also interesting is most of the people in this company have been together 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, they have a brotherhood, sisterhood, a bond, a love like you wouldn't believe. You think you leave the military and you're not going to find a place where people have each other's back. There's a sense of duty. Not this place. Well, that's not on anybody's radar. Who wants to go work for a boring electrical contractor? If it were me, I'd go there before I'd go to any of those sexy, cool companies, because you know what? Their values align with mine. I mean, and that's a tough thing to find. And that's one of the things I would share with you is, you know, you can define success by your own measure, or you can define it by others. And other people say, well, success is getting a job at Google. Success is this or that. But the older you get, the more you realize, you know what? I want to be around people that I trust, people that share in my values. I just coached a woman that just graduated, a special ops veteran, just graduated from law school, and she was being real opportunistic. And I said, what are you doing? What are your values? She told me. I go, all right, good. You know what your values are. Go find law firms that have the same values. And I said, go get 3 offers at the same time and evaluate the one that's best. And she did. And she just accepted a job this week. And it was all based on her values. And part of it was a remote and being able to spend time with her kids. And, they're going to reward her for being successful, and a partner fast track and all this stuff. And it's a firm nobody would have ever heard of. So part of it when you're getting and approaching the market is really figuring out, well, what do I want? And how am I going to define success? And how am I going to find a company or an organization where they share in my values? There's only one way, and that is to interview them, not get interviewed. You go out and talk to them and talk, and again, being curious. Well, what's your culture like? Why do people get hired? Why do people get promoted? Who are describe somebody that's gotten fired lately, which most of us aren't familiar with in the military. But that tells you more about a culture than anything, not what's on their website. Who gets promoted? Who gets fired? Why? So again, the brutal fact is, to really recognize where you're at. Again, if you're, a junior officer, you've got a lot more Fortune 500 options. If you're a senior officer, senior enlisted, it's going to be a lot harder. I mean, at 40 years old, do you really want to go, be with a bunch of 27-year-olds that are entry level positions? No. Are they going to bring you in as a senior level person? Probably not. Mid-sized company, those are the ones that are looking for COO types and, people that can, take on an ops role. And then here's the other reality of business. In the Army, it's, the infantry. In the Navy, maybe it's aviators, maybe it's submariners, but in the business world, it's the people that bring in the business, what you think of as sales. And sales isn't car sales, a clerk at Best Buy. I mean, sales is business to business. Sales is problem solving and consulting and generating demand. It's the people that make it rain that get paid the most because they provide the value. And here's the thing: in the military, you never had to worry about producing more value than you cost. It doesn't occur to you. In the business world, if you're not thinking all the time, look, they're paying me $150,000 a year, I better bring in $1.5 million. Otherwise, why'd they hire me? You only get hired for one reason, and that is they believe there's a return, that you're an investment. You're going to produce more than you cost. And if you don't figure out how you produce more than you cost and tell people about that, in other words, figure out how to market yourself, you're not going to last. So that's the other thing is, there's just no better way to learn the business world than, to get out and sell. And that's what I did at the beginning. And trust me, I didn't like it. It wasn't what I wanted to do. I felt like some of it was, beneath me. But in hindsight, best thing I ever did, because what separates my business success today as an entrepreneur from any other consultant that's doing what I do is my ability to sell. I can sell way better than people that do what I do. And that's why my business is doing well. I think I'm good, but I know how to sell. There's lots of people that are good, don't know how to sell. So let me just pause there. What questions you have? What's resonating? What's not resonating? Where do you want to be a contrarian and tell me I'm full of it? Bring it on. Go ahead, Lee.
Jan, I have something to share, and maybe it just validates some of what you were sharing. I through one of my 5 daughters has played on a top 10 nationally ranked fast pitch softball team, and it was interesting growing up watching these girls out of Houston play other girls from all over the country, and talk to some of them about where they were going to go play college ball. And while it's somewhat anecdotal, I always found that it was interesting that a girl would say, "I'm going to go play for, I don't know, East Tech State, whatever it was." And one of my first questions is, "Why did you pick East Tech State to go play for?" And it was interesting that a lot of people would answer with the what and not so much the why. And so as I talk to other veterans who are now let me rephrase that. As I talk to other people that are transitioning currently, I find that people that ask the what instead of the why are going to be very similar to what happened to a lot of these other girls, and that is the ones that didn't understand what they were going to study, that thought that they were going for one reason or going to college for one reason instead of the other reason, ended up transferring because they didn't like the coach, they didn't like the direction of the team from a strategy standpoint. They didn't understand why they were recruited so hard, because once they got there, the team was going in a different direction. As an example, those are some of the things that I'm concerned with, is the what as opposed to the why and where they fit into that bigger picture.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good insight, Lee. That's yeah, that it parallels into this perfectly. Any other questions, thoughts? Is this
Yeah,
resonating with you guys?
just one comment, sir. I remember Malcolm Gladwell talking about something like this in his book Outliers, right? Where he talks, or the David and Goliath, where he talks about the student that is the top of their class, right? Top of their class, and they have an option to go, or they have, they talk about one person goes to Harvard, and another person goes to Maryland. I think that's how the story kind of goes, and they're both top of their classes, right? And at the high school level, and then by the time that they get done with in this new pool of people that they're in, that persons that were at the very highest level at high school, when they graduated, they're now in a different pool of people. Whereas if you're not that like very tip of the spear, or in that even 10% of the very top of the class at Harvard, you're not going to get signed on by one of those major companies. Now, if you are the top 10% of the Maryland class of business school, guess what? All those same companies were going to hire that 10 percenter
Yep.
that you could have been in any place. So, I mean, it's a perspective.
Yeah.
It is name branding on some of it. But I would agree with you. I think that there's a lot to be sold on that name, but not necessarily the sausage and the ingredients inside of getting to the very, very end. That does it really truly matter.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing kind of that I wonder about a little bit is, the time I served it for 9 years. I heard thank you for your service twice in 9 years. Didn't happen. Many of you might not realize when the tide turned. It was January 1991 when Gulf War I was starting. Then all of a sudden the country got patriotic again. But after Vietnam, it was very, the military were really looked down upon. One of the things I worry about, and I have worried about for a while, is, boy, I hope that never goes back. And, over the last month, there's been some things that make me concerned that, our status, as military people really carried a lot of weight. I really hope, that doesn't change. But again, I think, other than a passing, hey, thanks for your service, what'd you do? Oh, that was cool. I don't think people are really into hearing as much as they did before, and all about that. I think, it kind of goes back to this book. Again, if you're going to read one book about the business world or anything leaving the military, if you haven't read this one that was written in 1936, read this one. And here it is summarized in 4 words: be interested versus interesting. That's it. Be interested versus interesting. And that means talking about yourself a lot less, and asking people lots and lots of questions. So, when I executive coach people, one of the things that I start with is the hardest question. And I'll throw this out to you all, and maybe you want to make a note or two, is this really, really simple, hard question. What do you want? What do you mean, Jan? What do I want? What do you want? What's your career aspiration? What kind of life do you and your spouse, you and your partner want to lead? What, it's the F's, right? Family, faith, finance, fulfillment, fitness. Like, how are you? What do you want? And that career is a lot of that fulfillment. When I interviewed Martin Dempsey, you guys ever heard of him? General Dempsey? Anybody heard of him? I said, what advice would you give for people transitioning? He goes, oh, that's easy. They join the military because they're passionate about service. Shouldn't that be what they do next? Be passionate about what they do? And so my interpretation of that is asking, for whose good do you serve? You join the military to serve the American people, right? Now, who are your people? I mean, if you listen to my talk so far, you know who my people are. It's people like you, veterans, and it's high-level executives in the business world. Those are my people. And by influencing high-level executives, I influence teams and people and companies and broader communities. But I want to help people that can really pull the levers and push the knobs of industry. So I figured that out, but it took a long time to figure out who my people were. So again, that's where I would start. The second thing I would do is make sure that you can basically list your top 3 to 5 values. And the reason this is so important is if you know what your values are in what priority order, then it's a lot easier to make decisions. When we're having trouble making decisions, it's usually because we have competing values. I want to make a lot of money, but I want to spend all this time with my kids. Well, which is it you want? As some of the leaders I've talked to have said, you can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. I mean, there's a series of compromises. You're going to have to decide, you want a high flying career? Are you ready to do what you did in the military? And that is move every 3 to 5 years. That's what I did in a Fortune 500 company. We moved more then than I did in the military. That came at a cost. The kids, were in a bunch of schools. Yet all these experiences, according to the spousal unit, said, hey, if you hadn't done all these things, you wouldn't be able to do what you're doing now. We had to go through all those trials and tribulations. So, one, figuring out what you want. And that might not just be your decision. It might be, for the first time, you really talking to that significant other and saying, we get to decide what our life looks like. Not the Army or the Marines or the Navy or the Air Force gets to decide. We do. And then align your values. And then the next thing is, again, I caution away from being opportunistic. That is, oh, they offered me this, and that, like, what the heck are you doing? It goes back to what you want, and you all know what, from the military experience, what targeting is, right? You guys know what targeting is, and a bunch of you know what unconventional warfare is. It's the same thing approaching this market. You've got a target, based on what you want. What do those companies look like? What I did back in the day before the internet, I found a book called, the 100 Best Companies to Work For. And I started going through, and as a former Special Forces medic, I went, I want to work for healthcare because I know healthcare. I think I've got a leg and blah, blah, blah. So I really looked at all the healthcare, what were the best companies, what were the values. And then I went, do I want to work for Pfizer out of New York or Marion Laboratories out of Kansas City? Like, I'm a Midwest values guy. I'm not a Northeast values guy. I went to Marion Laboratories, and they had 2 values. Those who produce shall share in the results. Treat others as you'd like to be treated. Awesome. Results, get stuff done, be nice. How different from the Army could that be? This is my place. These are my people. And I spent 10 really great years there, and actually got more. I shouldn't say more. I got as much leadership development at that company as I did in the military. I really did. And what's so funny is when I got there, I thought I knew everything. Why aren't they making me a manager tomorrow? And in hindsight, they did such the right thing, making me work my butt off for 3 years before promoting me, because I had no clue how to manage in the business world. I would have been a train wreck if they had let me manage right away at 27 years old. And again, I thought I knew everything. I was a Green Beret. I was a military intelligence officer. I didn't have a clue. Um, so when you're targeting, again, you can look at Fortune 500 companies, you can look at Fortune 2000, you can look at mid-sized small companies, you can look at nonprofit. Um, there's a lot of different ways, but what I would recommend, and this is in the sheet that I sent you, is to come up with a hypothesis. All of you might already have one. I think what's wrong with the business world is X. Well, when you're out there talking to people and networking, you know, maybe you ask everybody the same three questions. And you know what? After you've talked to 10 people, you've got a little, you've got a little um, thesis with 10 people, N of 10, where you've asked the same questions and maybe you've figured something out. Now you've got a reason to go back to those 10 people and say, hey, Shirley, I don't know if you remember, but I asked you about your biggest challenge. I asked 10 people in 5 different industries across the United States the same question. And here's what everybody came back with. You're not alone. You know what? I also asked what they're doing to address this challenge. And here's all the ideas. What do you think of that? Before you know it, somebody could be saying, you know what? Maybe we should be working together. I mean, for me in a smaller company, what's really cool is a lot of times they have the ability to create jobs. A Fortune 500 company, first off, your resume is going to go to a computer, which is basically trying to find ways to say no, and then you're going to go through the process. In smaller companies, you get to talk to decision makers. Again, I think if you're I'll say this, if you're over 40 and you're talking to people in HR, you might as well, just go in the backyard and burn money because you're burning time. You're not going to get anywhere talking to HR people. Their job is to find ways to say no. They are risk averse. They're like going through JAG trying to find an enemy target. They're just going to find ways to say no. So again, I think those are some things that I've learned. I called this, some of the rookie mistakes that I've seen and that I've made out there, and that if I were approaching it, that's what I do. And a lot of it is, this sense of, gosh, I've got to get a job. I've got to get a job, is a little bit to slow down, figure out what you want, figure out what are the potential targets, who should I be talking to. And if you don't become a master at LinkedIn, shame on you. And that is, like being a carpenter without a hammer. I can't even imagine doing anything in the business world without LinkedIn right now. I can't imagine. The other thing is, what I am always impressed with is if somebody's written some articles on LinkedIn and showed some expertise. If you're running a hypothesis and you've talked to 30 people, you got the ability to write an article and post it on LinkedIn. Somebody's looking at you as a potential hire. They're like, oh, this guy isn't just a former SEAL. He's actually, gathering information and coming up with some insights I hadn't thought of before. Dynamic subordination. Hey, what's that all about? That's a cool concept. Huh. You know what I'm talking about, right, Scott?
I sure do, sir.
Yeah. I forget the guy we had on. He works with Simon Sinek, one of the SEALs that came up with that. He was commander at the school. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But anyway, that's what I've got. And again, hopefully Garrett's been able to send this out to all of you, this one pager. What I've talked long enough. I hope I've provided some keenness of insight and some things to think about. I really would love to answer whatever questions you've got. And those questions can be,
I have one.
yeah, go ahead.
Where were you in the army that you felt that people were super nice?
I I'm saying I wasn't. That was the opposite of the army.
Oh, understood, understood.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah. Yeah, that was opposite. I was special forces at Fort Bragg as an enlisted guy, and then I was military intelligence at Fort Ord with 7th ID out in California at the time. And the 7th ID was trying to be better than the 82nd and 101st as an RDF, a rapid deployment force, oriented mainly to Asia and Central America. And so they were doing this experiment, keeping basic training platoons together as cohorts. And they would literally take them from basic and drop them into division. And they kept this almost like 1950s mentality to the whole thing. And we literally got in trouble. This is late 80s, and we got in trouble because my wife didn't wear white gloves to a officer wife tee. I mean, it was messed up. And I'll tell you one other thing. Every single officer there had a ranger tab, and I showed up with a special forces tab, and my battalion commander looked at my shoulder and goes, "When are you going to ranger school?" And as a 24-year-old punk, I said, "Sir, been there, done that. Ain't going to ranger school." That was the wrong thing to say. That was the wrong thing to say to old Colonel Norton. My life was not good after that. As a young second lieutenant. So
Do you find you were talking earlier? I mentioned the what versus the why, and then you threw out the Simon Sinek name and associated with that. Also left in the chat, as I've talked to some different people, one of the things that I've asked them is, did they want to be a big fish in a small pond,
oh yeah.
or do they want to be a big fish? Well, you understand. Um, the I've kind of talked to some different guys, having spent some time in the civilian world, and I asked them, do they want to be siloed and specialized in what they do, or do they want to make a big impact in a small company? How many hats do they want to wear, and how much chaos do they want to manage? From your experience, do you find that to be true as well?
Yeah, I think what's more important, again, the older you are, the more that you want to be with people you can trust. And that's where the values come in. No matter where you go, if the values aren't aligned, it's going to be really hard. And and that's the thing, is really trying to figure out where you can get with a company where the values are aligned. We interviewed Simon Sinek a few months ago, and it was interesting because he's in the process of reinventing himself and his company based on the pandemic. And we're getting ready to interview Margaret Heffernan, who talked about pandemics in July 2019 and how we're no longer in a complicated world, we're in a complex world that's not linear. And the more efficient we are, the less adaptable we are. And actually, we might be more efficient at making bad decisions. So, you're going to reinvent yourself as you get out. Doesn't mean you don't get to be your authentic self, but you're going to have to reinvent, and you're going to have to continue to reinvent, just like that first base coach. And that's, to me, what's exciting, and why I love doing what I do. And as I reflect back on my career, as a 19-year-old Green Beret, I was on the platform teaching at the Special Forces School. And I look back, and I have literally been doing the same thing since I was 19 years old. I've been developing leaders. That's what I've been a student of leadership. That's, in the big scheme, that hasn't changed at all. But I don't use slide carousels anymore. I don't stomp when I cover a test question. I've changed the way that I go about what I do. And and our podcast, the tagline for the leadership podcast is, "We study leaders." It's not we figured the whole thing out. It's like we're still studying these leaders, and they're all curious. Every one of them are readers, and every one of them will talk about how important networking is. I was on with Condoleezza Rice recently on a thing, and she was talking to a whole bunch of people that are oriented toward foreign service and intelligence, and you know, and they asked her for some words of wisdom, and she went on for 15 minutes about how important networking is, how it's everything, and that's what created all the opportunities she had in her career, and not networking in a like go to a cocktail reception, but figuring out the law of reciprocity. And I can tell you that, the other sins that I see, military people make. I'll give you two. One is long emails. Stop it. Just stop it. Stop selling. Don't sell anything in an email other than I want to have a conversation with you. Don't give me your whole resume. Don't stop selling. Short email. The second thing is don't take a week to get back with me because you want to write a perfect email. If you're not getting back to me in 24 hours in the business world, you're basically, you're not responsive. You're not somebody I want to do business with. And that's the two big things I see is military people not being concise and not being responsive, especially and right by responsive, I mean, if let's say Josh asked me to make an introduction and I did, hey, no problem, Josh. I'm not keeping track of it, but kind of in the back of my head is an expectation of, well, what happened with that meeting, or a little bit of a thank you, some sort of follow up. I see people neglecting that because, it should be, hey, Jan, I really appreciate it. If anybody else is like that person, that would be great. Or, hey, here's something I heard, or here's an article. I mean, the people that I've helped a lot that are, my kids' age, have figured out ways to be, to be reciprocal. And again, not that I'm expecting something, not that I want them to give me something, but they're giving back to the relationship. They're investing in the relationship in some way, somehow, and it makes me, like that, and I want to support them. And and there's certain people of all the people I've helped that I really continue to follow their career, and others that kind of have drifted off, and then it'll be 3 years and it's like they ring me up and it's only because guess what, they want something. They quit their job, they lost their job, now they need something. I'll help them, not with the same gusto I would with somebody that stayed in touch and and contributed to the relationship. So and the last thing I would say is when you get all squared away, whenever that is, pay it forward. Do what Garrett's doing. Pay it forward and help, because we know how to turn people into soldiers and sailors, Marines and airmen, but we have not figured out the recipe for turning people back into productive, efficient civilians. We're really we have failed. We have failed miserably trying to help people transition. So as maybe you'll figure out the recipe. And again, I think a little bit of it is us brothers and sisters taking care of each other better, frankly.
Hey, Jan, I appreciate it. Not to switch gears too much here, but earlier you mentioned one of the biggest, one of the biggest indicators for success in the business world was your ability to sell. So I keyed in on that and I was like, okay, well, so how was your transition coming out of the military? What industry did you jump into? And, what was the turning point for you where you were like, okay, I need this skill, or, these being around these people or this type of environment gives me the ability to really sell?
Great question. When I was getting out, we went through a firm for JMOs, junior military officers, and they basically said to us, you have two options. You can sell or you can be in manufacturing management. And I thought, I don't want to wear a hairnet. And I thought, but I don't want to sell. My dad was a car salesman. I don't want to sell. And I looked at pharmaceutical, and I had some interaction with pharmaceuticals as a Green Beret medic. And I thought, well, I can educate doctors. So I naively thought I was joining a pharmaceutical company and I was just going to educate docs. And in sales school, my roommate was a West Pointer, same age, and we were in the same region. And I still thought I was educating doctors until the first roster that came out that showed sales rankings. And I was below Scott Ritchie. And I'm like, and the competitive juices kicked in, and I'm like, I'm going to kick Scott's ass. And that's when I realized that I was in sales, honestly. And that was the motivation. And I, even having been a Green Beret, and I look at getting my Green Beret as something I survived more than I achieved. I mean, I weighed 114 pounds when I got my beret. I'm 135 now. I didn't know I was competitive. I mean, that was, and I really, and the best part about my business today is I love winning business because it means people value what I'm doing and I believe in what I'm doing. And I believed in the drugs that we were selling. I still do. I still think the drugs I was selling, a cardiovascular drug, was the best drug on the market. It's still out there, saving lots of lives. I still believe in it, and the way the company approached it, I thought was very ethical. We weren't sending doctors to Hawaii and all that crap. But that it was really competing. But how did I feel, Jonathan? Literally, I left the Army on Friday, and on Monday I was in this company, and I felt like a fish out of water. Um, you know, that my roommate and had more hair product than I did. I mean, than my wife did. I didn't even know what hair product was. Um, and I remember calling on these doctors, and I felt like 2 inches tall. I'm like, what the heck did I do? I went from getting saluted, driving in on post, to basically groveling for time from people. And, it took a couple years, but all of a sudden you get your swagger, you get your confidence, and you create a peer to peer. And I didn't subordinate myself to the doctors anymore because I felt like I knew more than they did. And it was like, bring it on. And to this day, I mean, when I'm selling, it's kind of like, hey, here's what I'm doing, and I have a lot of confidence, and I never feel like I'm groveling. I'm trying to help people. Either there's a fit or there isn't. But it takes a while. I mean, there's no way you're going to get into sales and not have some years where it's just a struggle, because you haven't figured out kind of your mojo and your confidence. But again, if you want to go into politics someday, or you want to have your own firm, or I mean, if you're ever going to be an entrepreneur, you better be good at sales. I mean, I don't care if you invent the best app in the world. Even Bill Gates knew how to sell. He was a geek and dorky and awkward, but Bill Gates knew how to sell. So, long answer.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? Hi, Lisa.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, I joined a little bit late. My job had real work meetings that ran long. Um, but the networking thing was something I was really challenged with when I left the service. I had a real tough time, and I'm still learning it. And actually, it's been the Elite Meet crew that's really taken me in under their wing to show me some of those skill sets. Even with a tier one graduate degree program, I just didn't get how to do it. And now I'm in New York City, which I'm a Midwest girl. I'm from Kansas City. I have roots in Colorado, and New York is definitely not my people as much. I live on the
Yeah.
Jersey side back. So, but I'm trying to keep the networking involved with the company I'm in because it's international. So there's chances to move and everything. And what what ways would you say to maintain long-term networking um, for just to keep those contacts open? Is it like monthly, every other month? What are ways and in the evolving technology, are there better ways, worse ways to maintain, or
Yeah.
you have to look per?
Yeah, I think you could make yourself crazy, like trying to keep track of it all. What kind of my rule of thumb, if it's kind of like if I think about somebody, I send them a note. You know, I, and it just might be a quick note. Hey, I was thinking of you, or I saw this, or you know, if I have a good enough relationship, I'll give them an update on my family or something, or a book recommendation. I post a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. I've got a lot of content out there. There's a lot of people reaching out to me, and that's like it's like a web. One thing leads to another. One of the things I've been thinking about lately is writing a post about thanking all the people and kind of showing folks like you, like, well, how did I get into coaching? Well, it was Teresa Letman, and Teresa Letman introduced me to this. And how did I know Teresa? Aaron. How did I know Aaron? And and looking back, and what I find is sometimes I'll start thinking about that, and then I'll send a note, and I'll say, hey, Aaron, I don't know if you know this, but our relationship has resulted in, gosh, tens of thousands of dollars of business for me and my firm. And I'm just really thankful. um, but where I really learned networking was in this big company when I first went to. Um, when I was in sales, and then sales coaching, and then in the home office, and then out in the field. And I realized that, boy, if I it was kind of like being Radar O'Reilly from MASH, or a good supply sergeant. If I knew how to work the system, I could get lots of stuff done. And I just worked the system, and I thought it was fun, to get to know people and to figure out how it worked. And I honed my skills internally, and then over time. And what's funny, people always ask, how do we get these great guests on the podcast? And it's real simple. We just ask them. There's very few people that are going to totally shut you down. If you have a genuine reason, and a compelling reason to say you want to meet with somebody. And again, if you're saying, I want to interview you, informational interview, I want I want to get your advice. I mean, people aren't going to turn you down. And LinkedIn is such a great way. I mean, all you got to do is find interesting people. Um, every day on LinkedIn, you can see somebody's promoting their latest book. Here's the thing: everybody's trying to sell 5 to 10,000 books in the first month, and you think, well, that's not very many books. That's a lot of books. If you were to reach out to an author and just say, hey, I'd love to interview you and promote this to my veteran friends, they talk to you. And then you learn a whole bunch from an author. There's lots of ways to network. You got to be creative, and again, do what is interesting to you. Don't do something that's way outside way outside of something that's not interesting to you. Does that help, Lisa?
Yeah, it does. It's a little almost overwhelming for somebody who's a very private person to start putting a brand out, especially after, having the army drill it into me that nope, don't put on social media, don't do this, don't do
I
that.
know.
It's a little bit of a shift for me.
I know. When I hit the send button when I published my book 10 years ago, and I sent it to the publisher, I remember thinking, there's my story. I mean, I'm naked to the world. Because it's the same thing, very private. And now it's like, I mean, I don't, there aren't pictures of my son or anything. There aren't grandkid pictures, but I mean, my story's out there. And you know it's part of my business. The other thing, I oftentimes with the people I coach, they'll talk about their personal brand, their reputation. And as you all know from your military days, you don't control your brand. I mean, your brand is what other people say it is. And you have a reputation in the military, and in the civilian world, you're going to have a reputation. And you can do things that hopefully influence the brand. But just like Apple does. But what you think of Apple is what the brand is. You either love Apple or you hate them. Um, and what you say about the Toyota or Mercedes or whatever. I mean, it's the same thing. We're all selling ourselves. And even getting a job is a sales campaign. That's what it is. It's a campaign. And to me, it's kind I mean, I always approached it it was kind of a fun perspective. It's kind of like a journey. Like, I know I'm going on this trip, and I think I know where I'm going to end up, but it's going to be interesting. There's going to be some bumps along the way. And you know what I wish I had done, and this is back in the old days, people would actually send you paper rejection letters. And I had a stack this thick of rejection letters when I was getting out of the army. and I wish I had kept it. I really wish I had kept it, and because a good portion of those, a year or two after I got out, and I was finding success in the business world, a lot of those companies reached out to me and tried to recruit me. And I remember thinking, I want to show you this letter. I wasn't good enough for you a year ago. Now you want me. Um, so
Lee has a question, Jan.
who does?
Jan, this is Lee.
Oh, go ahead.
I had a quick comment relative to keeping track of the network and how to reciprocate. This is what I've done, and I just thought I would share. I use a free CRM called HubSpot. I'm not giving them a shameless plug, and no, I don't make any money off of it. But it's worked for me. At the beginning, when my network was smaller, I would just keep track of. I would keep track of when I talked to somebody and make a couple of notes in my calendar. But it just got too much, too big, too arduous, and so I needed something like HubSpot. And what I would do is, in my meetings, I would, if I had a future meeting, let's say with John Doe, I would have a couple of canned bullet points of what I wanted to talk to him about. But I would come back in my CRM afterwards and update those notes and suggest I ended on that ask. So let's say we talked for 15 minutes and I wanted to know at the end, who could I meet or who could he introduce me to, that we could maybe do a deep dive on the conversation we just had because it was extremely compelling, as an example. Did you have any feelings on using a CRM like that in order to maintain those relationships and create a frequency and a cadence that made sense?
Yeah, it would be overwhelming for me. I think it would be doable at the beginning, but when you've got thousands of people, um, I mean, even here's what might surprise you. So I've got this little firm, right? Self-Reliant Leadership. If I look at all the people around this firm, there's 40 people. If I look at all my clients, we're talking, there's 150. It's it's big. It's hard to keep track of. I keep track of my prospects and I keep track of my clients, and I keep really good notes on that. As far as my network, um, I'm not methodical about it. LinkedIn, it really helps. And again, when I think of somebody, I'll send a message to them. Sometimes I'll see stuff they posted or they got promoted or something like that. I do a pretty good job of keeping track of birthdays of
Mhm.
people I've worked with, and always try to send a birthday message. Um, but
I think
if it works for you, Lee, I say go for it.
I think I made a mistake. I wasn't very specific enough. I think the scenario may be different. I specifically meant towards the campaign of targeting a company. As an example, if I thought for sure I wanted to work for Goldman Sachs,
Yeah.
and Garrett Harrell introduced me to his friends who did an intern at Goldman Sachs, and then it kind of spread from there and spread from there. And I was trying to create a campaign by which people knew my name within the organization, and I was also gaining intel on that organization as a part of my targeting campaign, and that's how I use it for stuff like that.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. Scott's got something. Go ahead, Scott.
Yes, sir. I just wanted to say I appreciate it. I got to drop off the call, but if I could get your email from Garrett, that would be great, just to connect back up with you. Love to chat with you offline, but I do got to get to another call. But I just want to appreciate your wisdom and your guidance tonight. These are real good nuggets for me, is where I'm going and where I'm sitting. So I appreciate you taking the time, and
You're welcome,
we'd
Scott.
love to connect with you again.
Yeah, and last thing I'll let you know, Scott, is one of the participants we had on a Crucible was Kerry Metz. I don't know if you remember Admiral Metz.
Yeah, I do. I do know him. Yeah.
Yeah.
He
So
was a reservist admiral, but I knew him before he was that
yeah.
reservist admiral. Yes, sir. I do know
Yeah.
him.
So Yeah. So yeah, feel free to connect with me, and for everybody, feel free to
I
connect with
appreciate
me
it.
on LinkedIn. Um, Garrett, I think that might be good right there. And again, I'm
Yep.
cognizant that it's kind of late on the East Coast, so I don't want to hold people over. Um, but it's really a pleasure being with all of you. I hope this wasn't it didn't feel totally random and all over the board, but there is a theme to it, um, which I think is really about adaptability and being resourceful and being curious. And again, I, I really appreciate all the service and sacrifice you've made in that of your families, because you've served during a time of war, and it's been hard, and I really appreciate it. And I can tell you, it's going to be, it's going to be a tough journey. And some people say the transition never ends. My son tells me the crucibles I've created is my own little ODA fantasy world. That I get to go out and pretend I'm still in the Army. That's what he thinks, and maybe there's some truth to it. I don't know, but really a pleasure being with all you. Garrett, I'll toss it over to you.
Yeah, Jan, thank you so much for being here tonight. It was fantastic. We Megan sent out the PDF to your 6 questions. I also had dropped it in the chat window for everybody. If you haven't seen, I did drop Jan's email address in there as well. And I definitely, if you can, take a look at his website and the blog and the podcast. I've listened to a few; they're fantastic. But Jan, we want to thank you for coming on again tonight. It was fantastic, and I greatly appreciate what you mentioned in the first part of your transition process about values. I literally brought that up to a different community a couple of weeks ago because I firmly believe that that is an important first step as well. But again, we do appreciate it. We will have this recording. There were some members that weren't able to attend tonight, but we'll be able to get this out and host it on our channels. And again, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure. And we'll see you all later. Good luck to all of you.